much, Anna. And hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to start my slides with a question from W.E.B. Du Bois. How does it feel to be a problem? This is a question that is on the first page of his book, The Souls of Black Folks, and it forces the reader to confront the plight of Black people in the US at the start of the 20th century, othered, excluded from society. But it's time to turn that question on whiteness. Here's George Yancey, Professor Yancey, with a quote from an article that he wrote. It's time to challenge the world of white normativity and white meaning making that creates the conditions under which Black people are already marked as different, deviant, and dangerous. It's time, in Yancey's words, to flip the script, to create a moment of uptake that awakens in whites a sudden and startling sense of having been seen. As an older white middle-class man, I know I have a lot of learning and a lot of unlearning to do. Well, how does white privilege shape my reality? Well, how long have you got? How much opening up of my world can I achieve? Am I prepared to put my white identity under the spotlight? But of course, it's easy for me to sit here pontificating. I'm conscious of the mental space, the room I have to operate in. I've never felt confined or restricted. It's time to turn the question on whiteness. And it's easy for me to be pontificating. I'm conscious of the mental space, the room I have to operate in. I've never felt confined or restricted. That's what being white and middle class and male is about in our society. So how can I open this conversation? The only way to achieve communication is to be open, is to see it as two-way, is to share with others versions of reality, different narratives. If I am to claim to be taking part in processes that are about making meaningful change in society, I must ask and expect to be asked awkward questions. I must engage in dialogue where I hope to be able to use the first person plural, the we, where I am part of a process that is based on trust and openness, as we explore what it means to move beyond what we call the color line, beyond the social constructs that go around race. So a bit about my background. I worked for many years in education. I was a specialist support teacher in a further education college in inner London. I saw myself as having a role as a gatekeeper, slide 2, as enabling my students to have confidence and be ready to fly on their own wings. It's inspiring stuff, obviously, eh? But all this talk of enabling and pushing open doors is just talk, unless it is matched by coherent political action, as Sade was saying. So in the next slide, we have a quote from Professor Emejulu of Warwick University. She says that what's missing from the conversation is any political will to make the changes required. So I can rail as much as I like about the inequalities, recognize the societal constraints that restrict other lives, but what gives me the right, or gave me the right, to talk to students about finding their voice? Why should they listen to me? I have never in my middle-class white existence had to fight to maintain my place in this society. I've never felt what James Baldwin calls that rich confusion that comes from being aware of living in a divided society. I don't have to double think in my daily life. Slide 3 shows Du Bois and his quote about double thoughts, double duties, and double social classes, which lead to a hesitancy which is fatal to self-confidence. I've never experienced the restraints and slights that he talks about. Throughout my life, my white privilege has allowed me to pass through checkpoints and barriers with some ease. It's like I've been traveling on a freeway in my white saloon, Slide 4, my blankety blank freedom pass. I have a pass that means that at the toll booth, the barriers just flip up and let me go through. My journey has been largely trouble-free. I glide by. I go on my way. But now I recognize, or rather I've been made to acknowledge through my work with the Whiteness and Race Equality Network, that it's time to stop and get out of my white box and look around. Well, we're always being told, aren't we, that we're on some sort of journey. So tell you what, let's pull off this metaphorical motorway and I'll meet you at the next service station. Slide 5. Here we are, a nice, neutral, white ambience. So grab a chair and suppose that there's music in the background. Elvis Presley singing Hound Dog. It's good for sure, but not as good as Big Mama Thornton's original version. She knocks Elvis's take into a cocked hat. Now here's another slide. This is Bob Dylan. One of the inspirations behind Blowing in the Wind was the 19th century song of defiance, No More Auction Block for Me. I heard a recording made in the 50s by Odetta. This rich association between artists of different races needs to be explored further. Too often, the link that brings them together, that shows how one influences the other, is ignored. And in this process, Odetta's and Thornton's artistry becomes subjected to the restraints and slights that Du Bois talks about. The Black Lives Matter movement is helping us to refocus on the interplay between cultures, to reevaluate the contribution of artists and thinkers. Now, in any creative process, there needs to be an interplay, and we don't need any sort of white check-in process along the way. Progression routes for creative thinkers should be an open freeway, but that's not the case. Slide 6. Statistics show that people of color might get on the bottom rung of ladders of such organizations, but it's hard to make progress. UK, this is from the UK Equality and Diversity Task Force data. Again, I come crashing back to Du Bois' analysis and realize its continuing relevance a century later. And I know what Sade says about the use of terms, people of color and so on, how significant these can be in limiting our responses. Let me, if I may, stick to some observations about music. What I described above, the failure to fully acknowledge and value the contribution of Black creativity, sheds light on what happens in our society in general. Whiteness consumes, it consumes culture. If it likes the product, it takes it and treats it as its own. But it also likes the status quo. It doesn't like radical change, I would suggest. Change, questioning, shifting perspectives presents problems. If work is valued in its own right, it can become an act that affects change. Artists, thinkers, designers, athletes, footballers need to be agents of change. Their work can lead to reevaluations, to the toppling of stereotypes and statues, and a reevaluation of the significance of the lived experience of individuals and groups. If lives and cultural backgrounds can be respected and fully acknowledged, then we may be in a position to talk to and not at each other. Well, history is full of examples of missed opportunities. In slide 7, I show you some sheet music from the new World Symphony by Anton Dvorak. This European composer went to America in 1892. He was invited by white establishment to establish classical music in the New World. His hosts were disconcerted by his response to the Black folk music that he heard. As you see in this quote, he said that in it, I discover all that is needed for a great and noble school of music. His famous New World Symphony uses themes and melodies he derived from Black music. His views were considered curious by the white establishment, and they sidelined a lot of his commentaries. and tried to ignore him. But in New York, he persisted, and in New York, he met a violinist and composer called, slide 8, Will Marion Cook, who not only became a Dvorak's student, but was also the future mentor of Duke Ellington, who you see in this slide. And while this cross-fertilization of musical styles led to all kinds of innovations, white privilege meant the opportunities for Black artists to actually make a living from their work were greatly restricted. Prejudice, white privilege shut the door. We can get a new perspective on reality only if we can enact the political changes that will validate expression of different cultures and celebrate the interaction between them. If we can open routes to dialogue and keep them open by clearing the landslides of ignorance and prejudice and privilege, we can start to work together. This is a political act. Enough of this constant asking Black culture, Black self-expression to justify itself and explain itself. We have to challenge the status quo, the patriarchal voice of white authority that too often dictates the terms of engagements. In our work promoting better mental health provision, there are many roadblocks we need to clear. Let's open up a route to those creative thinkers, those academics, past and present, who have worked to challenge the pre and misconceptions that the racialized thinking of the past has imposed. Slide 9. To quote Audre Lorde, in order to come together, we must recognize each other. We must, as she said, maintain dialogue. We need tools we can use to explore new ways of seeing what we thought we knew. Tools honed by commentators who enact changes that shift perspectives. So let's bring Du Bois, let's bring Fanon and Foucault and the rest of the teaching and learning table. Let's open a dialogue between Afro and Eurocentric approaches. It's high time. So finally, these new alignments must be reflected with the structure and organizations within the structure of organizations like REN and the Mental Health Foundation, if we are to enact change and not just talk. We have to seize the opportunity that my colleague, Dr. Colin King's work offers. Slide 10. His narrative and routes forward offers a route forward to a new consensus by highlighting the contribution of Afrocentric approaches and showing how they can complement European models. He shows how new perspectives can be opened, perspectives that will improve service provision. Here is an opportunity to enrich the teaching and learning and lived experience of professionals and service users alike. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll leave you with a list of the sources I use for this talk. Thanks.